I didn't find out my wife was cheating because of lipstick on a collar or a late-night text. I found out because $50,000 vanished from our savings account, and when I asked the bank where it went, they told me it was wired to a man named Julian, with the memo line simply reading, NDA. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that usually brought me peace. It was just past 2 in the morning in our sprawling Connecticut home, a glass and timber structure I had designed myself. My wife, Elena, was asleep upstairs, resting before another 60-hour week at her firm. She was a crisis manager for the elite, a woman who spun disasters into golden opportunities for senators and CEOs. I often joked that she was the fixer and I was the builder. We were a good team, or so I thought. I was in my study, nursing a tumbler of scotch and reviewing our quarterly financials. We were planning to buy a vacation property in the Berkshires, a place to disconnect from the noise of her career and the demands of mine. I opened the joint savings account on my laptop, the blue light of the screen cutting through the dim room. I expected to see a balance hovering around the mid-six figures. Instead, the number was wrong, significantly wrong. I blinked, rubbing my eyes, assuming it was a glitch or perhaps a pending deposit that hadn't cleared. I refreshed the page. The number stayed the same. A hollow feeling expanded in my chest, distinct from panic. It was confusion. I clicked on the transaction history, scrolling past the mortgage payments, the country club dues, and the tuition for our daughter's boarding school. And there it was, dated 3 days ago. Wire transfer, negative $50,000. There was no recipient name immediately visible on the summary screen. My first instinct was protection. I thought we had been hacked. $50,000 was a substantial amount, even for us. It was the kind of money that triggered federal reporting requirements. I grabbed my phone, ready to call the fraud department, but stopped. Elena was meticulous. She managed the day-to-day expenses. If there had been a breach, she would have known. Unless she made the transfer. I sat back in my leather chair, the leather creaking loudly in the stillness. Why would Elena move 50 grand without telling me? An investment? A loan to her reckless brother? She usually discussed those things. We didn't have secrets. That was our rule. In her line of work, secrets were landmines, and she prided herself on living in a clear zone at home. I clicked on the transaction details to download the wire confirmation. The PDF opened slowly. Beneficiary, Julian Vane. Routing, Chase Manhattan, Soho branch. Memo, NDA, contractual services. The glass of scotch slipped from my fingers, tipping over on the mahogany desk. I didn't move to wipe it up. I watched the amber liquid soak into the papers I had been reviewing. Julian Vane. I didn't know a Julian Vane. We didn't employ a Julian Vane. The contractors for the house renovation were a firm called Summit Build. Our landscapers were Green Earth. And then there was the memo, NDA, non-disclosure agreement. My architect's brain, usually so good at understanding structure and load-bearing walls, struggled to support the weight of this information. You pay for an NDA when you need someone to stay quiet. You pay $50,000 when the information they have is worth destroying you. I stood up, my legs feeling heavy, and walked to the window. The reflection showed a man who looked older than his 45 years. I looked at the staircase leading up to the master bedroom. Elena was up there, sleeping soundly under Egyptian cotton sheets, likely wearing her silk eye mask. What kind of service requires a $50,000 silence? I went to my computer and typed Julian Vane, New York into the search bar. The results were instantaneous. He wasn't a lawyer. He wasn't a financial consultant. He was a photographer, an artistic visionary, according to his Instagram bio. I clicked on the images. They were moody, black and white, sensual. And there, in the third row of his grid, was a photo taken 6 months ago. It was a candid shot of a woman looking out a rainy window in a coffee shop. Her face was partially obscured by a reflection, but I knew the curve of that jawline. I knew the specific Cartier watch on the wrist resting against the glass. It was Elena. The caption read, "The Muse. Tuesday afternoons are for secrets." The air left the room. It wasn't just a theft of funds. It was a transaction. She hadn't just cheated on me, she had itemized the infidelity. She had placed a market value on our marriage, on her reputation, and on this man's silence. I didn't storm upstairs. I didn't scream. The betrayal was too precise for that. It was calculated. She had treated her lover like a PR crisis that needed to be managed, a budget line item to be zeroed out. I sat back down and printed the wire transfer. The hum of the printer was the only sound in the house. I held the warm piece of paper in my hand. This wasn't just proof of an affair. This was proof of who my wife truly was. She believed she could buy her way out of consequences. Tomorrow, I wouldn't ask her if she loved him. I would ask her if she got a receipt. The train ride into Manhattan felt like a funeral procession. The morning commute was packed with professionals in gray suits and beige trench coats, hiding behind newspapers and glowing tablet screens. I sat among them, a ghost in my own life, clutching a leather briefcase that contained nothing but a printed screenshot of a wire transfer and a photo of my wife sitting in a cafe window. I hadn't slept. The whiskey stain on my desk was still tacky when I left the house before Elena woke up. I couldn't look at her, not yet. I needed to understand the architecture of the lie before I took a sledgehammer to the foundation. Julian Vane's studio was located in a converted garment factory in Soho. The building had the kind of gritty, exposed brick aesthetic that real estate developers charged a premium for, but the buzzer panel was rusted and covered in stickers. I pressed the button next to 4B. "Yeah?" A voice crackled through the speaker. It was young, unsuspecting. "Delivery for Mr. Vane," I lied. My voice sounded flat, detached. The buzzer buzzed, a harsh electric rasp. I pushed the heavy metal door open and climbed the stairs. The hallway smelled of turpentine and stale coffee. When I reached the 4th floor, the door was already ajar. Julian stood there. He was younger than I expected, perhaps late 20s. He wore paint-splattered jeans and a t-shirt that had seen better days. He had the kind of messy, effortless hair that Elena used to say made a man look soulful. He looked tired, his eyes red-rimmed, as if he hadn't slept much either. "I didn't order anything," he said, looking at my empty hands, then up at my face. He frowned, sensing the shift in atmospheric pressure. "Who are you?" "I'm Liam," I said, stepping into the room without an invitation. "Elena's husband." The color drained from his face so fast I thought he might faint. He stumbled back a step, gripping the doorframe. The studio was chaotic. Canvases leaned against every wall, the smell of linseed oil thick in the air. It was a place of raw creation, messy and vibrant. It was everything our pristine, glass-walled home in Connecticut was not. I don't," Julian stammered. "She said you wouldn't. She said you were in London for business." "I was," I said, closing the door behind me. The lock clicked with a finality that made him flinch. "I came back. I found the ledger, Julian." I walked over to a workbench and placed the printout of the wire transfer on top of a stack of sketches. The bold text of the transaction stared up at us. $50,000. "I want to know what I bought," I said calmly. The calm was the scariest part. I felt like I was watching myself from the ceiling. $50,000? That's a lot of money for a photographer. Was it blackmail? Did you threaten to send the photos to her firm? Julian looked at the paper, then at me, his expression shifting from fear to genuine confusion. Blackmail? No. God, no. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing a tight circle in the middle of the room. "I didn't ask for a cent. I didn't want it." "The memo says NDA," I pointed out. "That's a legal contract. You don't sign an NDA for free, and you certainly don't get paid 50 grand unless you have something damaging to sell." Julian stopped pacing. He looked at me with a sudden, piercing sadness. "I didn't sell anything. She told me it was a severance package." The words hung in the air, absurd and clinical. A severance package? "She broke it off last week," Julian said, his voice quiet. "She came here. She sat on that stool right there and told me that her profile was rising, that she was being vetted for a position in Washington. She said we were a liability." He laughed bitterly. "Not a mistake. A liability." He walked over to a desk and pulled a thick envelope from a drawer. He tossed it onto the workbench next to my printout. She brought the contract with her. She said the money was to help me get my gallery show off the ground. She said she wanted to make sure I was taken care of so I wouldn't feel resentful. She made me sign it before she would even hug me goodbye. I reached out and opened the envelope. It was a standard non-disclosure agreement, but drafted with the aggressive precision of a corporate shark. It stipulated that Julian Vane could never discuss the nature of his relationship with Elena, could never publish photos of her, and acknowledged that the payment of $50,000 was a settlement for consulting services rendered. It was a business transaction. She had terminated him like an underperforming employee. "I thought she loved me," Julian whispered, looking at a canvas turned against the wall. But when she handed me the check, she didn't look sad. She looked efficient. I looked at the young man. I had come here expecting to find a villain, someone I could hate, someone I could blame for corrupting my wife. Instead, I found another victim of Elena's ambition. She hadn't just cheated on me, she had used him to feel something, and when the feeling became inconvenient, she balanced the books. She didn't pay you to keep you quiet because she was afraid of me finding out, I realized aloud, the truth settling in my gut like lead. She paid you because she thinks everyone has a price. She thinks she can budget for human error. I looked around the studio one last time. It was a place of passion, however misguided. Elena didn't belong here. She belonged in boardrooms and galas, places where intimacy was just another commodity to be traded. "Keep the money, Julian," I said, turning to the door. "You earned it. You showed me exactly who she is." "What are you going to do?" he asked, his voice trembling. I paused with my hand on the doorknob. "I'm going to go home, and I'm going to see if she tries to negotiate my severance package too." I pulled into the driveway just as the sun was beginning to dip below the tree line, casting long, distorted shadows across the manicured lawn. The house looked exactly as it always did, pristine, imposing, an architectural marvel of glass and steel. It was a fortress of success. Inside, however, the air felt thin, recycled, insufficient to sustain life. Elena was in the kitchen, the island counter covered in dossiers and color-coded binders. She was wearing a cream-colored silk blouse and tailored trousers, looking every inch the power broker she was. She was on a call, her voice maintaining that perfect modulated pitch she used when putting out fires for senators or tech moguls. Deny the premise of the question, Marcus. If you pivot to the environmental initiative, the scandal becomes background noise. It's basic deflection. She tapped a pen against a notepad, then looked up. Her eyes met mine. She didn't smile, but she didn't flinch either. "I have to go. My husband just walked in." She hung up and set the phone down, face up. "You're home early. I thought you had a site visit in Greenwich." "I was in Soho," I said. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was sharp. It sliced through the room. Elena's expression didn't crumble. She didn't drop her pen or cover her mouth in shock. Instead, her eyes narrowed slightly, a microscopic calculation taking place behind the iris. She was assessing the threat level. "Soho," she repeated, her voice neutral. "Did you buy art?" "I met Julian," I said, tossing the wire transfer printout onto the marble countertop, right on top of her binders. "And I saw the receipt for the silence you bought." Elena looked at the paper. She didn't reach for it. She didn't need to read it. She knew the figures by heart. She took a slow breath, straightened her posture, and folded her hands on the counter. It was the stance she took during press conferences. "I can explain the accounting," she said. "The accounting?" I let out a dry, incredulous laugh. "Elena, I'm not auditing the books. I'm asking why you paid a kid $50,000 to sign an NDA after sleeping with him." She walked around the island, putting a calculated distance between us. "It wasn't just sleeping with him, Liam. It was a lapse in judgment, a temporary weakness, and I handled it." "Handled it," I echoed. "Is that what we call it now?" "You treated a human being like a bad quarterly report." "I treated a potential threat like a liability," she corrected, her tone hardening. "You know I'm being vetted for the communications director role in DC. The background check is invasive. They look at everything. bank records, associates, digital footprints. Julian was reckless. He takes photos, he talks. If anyone found out about the affair, the narrative wouldn't just be Elena cheated. It would be Elena is compromised. It would destroy the appointment. I stared at her, waiting for the crack in the armor, waiting for the "I'm sorry," or "I messed up," or "I love you, please forgive me." But there was nothing, just strategy. So the 50 grand was what? An investment in your career? It was an investment in us, she said, stepping closer, her eyes intense. Think about the life we built, Liam. This house, your firm, the reputation we have. Do you want to throw that away because I had a momentary distraction? Julian means nothing. He was a symptom of stress, nothing more. I realized the danger, I ended it, and I ensured his silence. I sanitized the record. I did what was necessary to protect this family. You didn't protect the family, I said, my voice shaking with a rage I was trying desperately to suppress. You protected your brand. You think you can price tag everything. You think because you paid him off, the betrayal doesn't exist anymore. Like you balanced the equation. It is balanced, she insisted, frustrated now, as if I were a slow-witted client refusing to accept a winning strategy. He signed the contract. He can't talk. The money is gone, but the risk is gone too. We can move past this. No one has to know. I know, I whispered. She paused, smoothing the front of her blouse. You're hurt. I understand that. It's emotional. But try to look at this pragmatically. If this gets out, you look like a fool, and I look like a predator. We both lose. If we stay quiet, we continue as we are, powerful, respected. I looked at the woman I had been married to for 12 years. I realized then that she wasn't seeing a husband in pain. She was seeing a stakeholder who needed to be brought back in line. She was managing me. You really believe that, don't you? I asked. You think the only cost of an affair is the hush money. The cost is whatever we decide it is, she said firmly. Now, we have the Children's Hospital Gala tonight. We are sitting at the head table. I need you to go upstairs, shower, and put on your tuxedo. We have a role to play. I'm not going, I said. You are going, she countered, her voice dropping to a steely command. Because if you don't show up, people will talk. And if people talk, the $50,000 I spent to keep our lives clean will have been a waste. Do not waste our money, Liam. She turned back to her binders, picking up the pen as if the conversation was concluded. The car will be here at 6. I stood there for a long moment, watching her highlight a paragraph in a dossier. She had already moved on. The affair was closed. The payment was made. The husband was informed. In her mind, the crisis was managed. I walked up the stairs, not because I was obeying her, but because I needed to get away from the terrifying coldness of her logic. She thought she had bought silence. She didn't realize that by paying for it, she had bankrupted everything that actually mattered. Tonight, I would wear the tuxedo. I would go to the gala, but not to play my role. I wanted to see how well she could perform when the audience was watching, knowing that the man standing next to her knew exactly how much her integrity cost. The flashbulbs were the worst part. They popped in rapid succession, a strobe light effect that made the world feel disjointed and stuttering. We stepped out of the black limousine onto the red carpet leading into the Pierre Hotel. The air was cold, but the atmosphere was electric with the hum of wealth and influence. Chin up, Liam. Smile with your eyes, Elena murmured, her lips barely moving. Her hand was clamped onto my forearm, not for support, but for control. She was steering me. I forced the corners of my mouth upward. It felt like stretching old rubber. I was wearing the tuxedo just as she had commanded. I was playing the role of the supportive, successful architect husband. Beside me, Elena was radiant in a midnight blue gown that cost more than most people's cars. She waved at the press line, her smile dazzling, practiced, and utterly vacant of genuine warmth. Elena, over here! A quote on the rumored DC appointment, a reporter shouted. She paused, turning her best angle to the camera. Tonight is about the children, not politics. But let's just say, I'm ready to serve wherever I'm needed." She squeezed my arm, a silent signal to keep moving. We entered the ballroom, a cavern of crystal chandeliers and floral arrangements that smelled overwhelmingly of lilies. It was a room full of sharks in silk and satin. As we navigated the crowd, I felt a profound sense of dissociation. I watched Elena work the room with the precision of a surgeon. She greeted the hospital administrator with empathy, the senator with deference, and the tech billionaires with wit. She was a chameleon, shifting her skin to match whoever stood before her. For 12 years, I had admired this skill. I thought it was social intelligence. Now, after seeing the wire transfer and the contract, I realized it was something else entirely. It was a lack of a core self. She wasn't adapting, she was performing. And I was just a prop, a cardboard cutout of a husband designed to make her look stable and relatable. "Liam, darling, you remember Senator Holloway?" Elena's voice cut through my thoughts. I blinked, focusing on the silver-haired man standing in front of us. "Senator, good to see you." "Good to see you, son," the senator boomed, shaking my hand with a grip that was too tight. "Your wife was just telling me about your renovation project in the Berkshires. A family retreat, she called it. A place to get back to basics." I felt a wave of nausea. The Berkshires house, the one we were supposed to buy with the savings account she had raided to pay off her lover. "It's important to have a sanctuary," Elena said smoothly, looking at me with eyes that dared me to contradict her. "Especially in our line of work, transparency and public service take a toll. You need a place where you can just be honest." The word hung between us like a suspended guillotine. Honesty. She used the word as a weapon. She was looking the senator in the eye, preaching about integrity, less than 12 hours after justifying a $50,000 hush money payment. "You're a lucky man, Liam," the senator said, clapping me on the shoulder. "A woman with values like this is rare in this town." "Rare indeed," I managed to say. My voice was hoarse. I grabbed a glass of champagne from a passing waiter, needing something to wash down the bitter taste of the lie. We moved on. We sat at the head table, the centerpiece of the event. I watched her eat, small, precise bites. I watched her laugh at the MC's jokes. It was terrifying how normal she seemed. If I hadn't seen the bank ledger, I would never have known. She wasn't riddled with guilt. She wasn't worried about Julian. She had paid the fee, archived the file, and moved on. Halfway through the main course, she leaned over to me, her breath warm against my ear. To an observer, it looked like an intimate moment between lovers. "You're doing well," she whispered, "but you're drinking too fast. Slow down. We have to network during dessert." "I'm not networking," I whispered back, staring straight ahead at the podium. "I'm surviving." "Don't be dramatic," she hissed. "This is for our future. Do you want to ruin everything because of your pride?" "It's not pride, Elena. It's reality. You're sitting here pretending to be a saint, and I'm the only one who knows you're just a manager of secrets." She pulled back, her smile freezing in place. "Everyone has secrets, Liam. I'm just better at keeping mine than most. Now, put the glass down. The governor is looking this way." I looked toward the governor. He was indeed looking at us, smiling benignly at the picture-perfect couple. I realized then that Elena was right about one thing. This world was built on perception. But she was wrong about me. She thought I was part of the machinery. She thought that because I had come tonight, I had accepted the contract. I set the glass down, not because she told me to, but because I needed a clear head. The gala was a theater, and the play was a tragedy. I watched her charm the table, realizing that the woman I loved didn't exist. She was a construct, a collection of strategic moves and calculated risks. And the scariest part wasn't that she had cheated. It was that she felt absolutely entitled to buy her way out of it, and she expected me to applaud the transaction. As the applause for the keynote speaker swelled, filling the room with a thunderous noise, I felt a strange, cold calm settle over me. The confusion of the last 24 hours was gone. I knew exactly what I was looking at now. I wasn't looking at my wife. I was looking at a defendant who hadn't realized the trial had already started. 3 weeks passed. The silence in our house had mutated. It was no longer the sharp, jagged silence of the night I found the wire transfer. Now it was a heavy, suffocating blanket. We were living in a ceasefire. Elena believed she had won. She thought my presence at the gala and my continued residence in our home meant that I had accepted the terms of her management. She mistook my numbness for compliance. She was more confident than ever. The DC appointment was all but secured. Her vetting process was reportedly in its final stages. She moved through the house with the swagger of a woman who had gambled everything on a single hand, and the dealer had blinked. I was in the kitchen, reading the morning news on my tablet, when the breach happened. It was a Tuesday, gray and rainy, the kind of New England weather that seeps into your bones. Elena was pouring coffee, checking her emails on her phone. "The vetting committee wants one last interview on Friday," she said, not looking up. "Just a formality. They want to clarify some trust fund structures for the kids. It's done, Liam. We're going to Washington." She set the phone down and finally looked at me, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "I told you, everything is manageable." Before I could respond, her phone rang. It wasn't her standard ringtone. It was the sharp, urgent trill she assigned to her lawyer, Marcus. She frowned, picking it up. "Marcus, it's 7 in the morning. Is everything—" She stopped. The color didn't just drain from her face, it vanished, leaving her skin looking like parchment. She listened for a long time, her knuckles turning white as she gripped the marble counter. "That's impossible," she snapped, though her voice lacked its usual steel. "It's a private transaction. It has nothing to do with the campaign. No, I will not comment on the record. Marcus, fix this. Kill it before it prints." She ended the call and slammed the phone onto the island, the sound echoing like a gunshot. She stood there, breathing hard, staring at the black screen. "What happened?" I asked, though I felt a dark premonition stirring in my gut. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a fear I hadn't seen even when I confronted her about the affair. "It's the Washington Post, an investigative reporter. They're running a story on the vetting process." "And?" "They flagged a transaction," she whispered. "The $50,000. I set my coffee cup down. "I thought you said the NDA was airtight. Julian can't talk." "It's not Julian," she hissed, pacing the length of the kitchen. "It's the bank records. The vetting team did a deep dive into our liquidity. They saw the wire transfer to Julian Vane. They saw the memo line, NDA/contractual services." "So?" I asked, leaning back. "They found a payment. You said you handled it." "You don't understand," she said, her voice rising in panic. "They don't know he's a lover. They don't know it's for an affair. They looked up Julian Vane and saw he's a struggling artist with no political experience, no consulting background, and no reason to be on my payroll." She stopped pacing and looked at me, the horror of the situation finally dawning on her. "The reporter thinks it's a bribe, Liam, or money laundering. They think I'm funneling money to a third party to bypass campaign finance laws or to pay for off-the-books political opposition research. They think contractual services is code for dirty work." I stared at her, the irony hitting me with the force of a physical blow. She had been so desperate to dignify her betrayal, so desperate to make the affair look like a business transaction, that she had labeled it as one. If she had just written gift or personal loan, it might have raised eyebrows, but it wouldn't have looked like professional misconduct. But by writing NDA and consulting, she had turned a moral failure into a legal crisis. "You tried to make it look professional," I said quietly, "and you succeeded. Now they think you're a crook, not a cheater." "They sent a request for comment," she said, her hands trembling, "asking for the nature of the consulting services provided by Mr. Vane. If I tell them the truth, that I paid him to keep quiet about sex, the scandal ruins the appointment and my reputation as a family woman. I become a laughingstock. And if you don't tell them the truth?" "Then they run with the corruption angle," she said, sinking onto a bar stool. "They'll say I'm hiding financial impropriety. They'll demand an investigation into where the money went. The DOJ could get involved if they think it's related to the federal appointment. She looked at me, her eyes pleading. Liam, we have to do something. We have to say it was, I don't know. Maybe we can say it was for art, for the house? For $50,000? I shook my head. For a photographer who doesn't sell paintings. And why an NDA for art? It doesn't hold up, Elena. The lie is collapsing under its own weight. You have to help me, she said, reaching across the counter to grab my hand. Her palms were cold and clammy. If you back me up, if we present a united front, maybe we can say it was a private legal settlement for harassment? Maybe we say he was stalking me. I pulled my hand away. The disgust I felt was absolute. She was willing to destroy Julian, who had done nothing but fall for her lies, just to save her own skin. She was willing to accuse him of a crime to cover up her payment. You want to accuse the man you slept with of stalking you? I asked, my voice low and dangerous. You want to ruin his life completely just to keep your title. I have to survive, she cried out. I am not going to let a fling destroy everything I've built. You didn't build this, Elena. I stood up, grabbing my briefcase. You bought it, and now the bill is due. Where are you going? She demanded, panic sharpening her voice. I'm going to work, I said, walking toward the door. Because one of us has to earn an honest living. And Elena? Don't ask me to lie for you. I kept your secret because I was processing my own grief, but I won't help you frame an innocent kid or lie to the federal government. You wanted to be a power player, handle the crisis. I walked out the door, leaving her sitting in the pristine, expensive kitchen, surrounded by the wreckage of her own meticulous planning. The silence she had bought was gone, the noise was coming, and it was going to be deafening. By noon, the news vans were lined up along the stone wall that marked the perimeter of our property. From my study window, they looked like a besieging army, their satellite dishes pointed at the house like siege weapons. The phone hadn't stopped ringing. The landline, our cell phones, even the private line we kept for emergencies. It was a cacophony of demands for comment. The headline on the Washington Post website was simple and devastating. Vetting process stalls. Nominee linked to undisclosed hush money payments. It wasn't the scandal Elena had feared. It was worse. Because she had used an NDA, a tool of corporate warfare, to hide a romantic indiscretion, the press didn't smell sex, they smelled corruption. The talking heads on cable news were already speculating. Was Julian Vane a foreign asset? Was he a lobbyist paid off the books? Was this money laundering disguised as consulting? Elena was in the living room, surrounded by her crisis team. 2 junior associates had managed to slip in through the back service entrance. They were young, terrified, and typing furiously on laptops. Elena stood in the center of the room, still wearing her silk robe, her hair pulled back in a severe bun. She looked like a general whose supply lines had been cut. No, she barked into a speakerphone. We do not confirm the identity of the recipient. We cite privacy laws. Pivot to my record on fiscal responsibility. Elena, a voice crackled back. It was her mentor, a senior party strategist. You can't pivot. The memo line says NDA. That implies you have something to hide that is worth 50 grand. If you don't define what that is, the imagination of the American public will define it for you, and they are imagining treason or bribery. It's a private legal matter, she screamed, losing her composure for the first time. It has nothing to do with my fitness for office. Then tell us what it is, the strategist said calmly. If it's just a settlement for a slip-and-fall lawsuit, show us the paperwork. If it's something else, we need to know. She looked at the phone, then at me. I was standing in the doorway, leaning against the frame, watching her empire crumble. She couldn't tell them. If she said, I paid a lover to shut up, the corruption charges would vanish, but the moral high ground she needed for the appointment would evaporate. She was trapped in a prison of her own design. She ended the call and cleared the room. Everyone out, give us a minute. The associates scrambled away like frightened mice. When we were alone, the silence of the house felt heavy, pressurized. This is spiraling, she said, her voice low. She walked over to the sideboard and poured a glass of water. her hand shaking so badly she spilled half of it. "They're calling me Nixon in heels on Twitter. They think I'm a criminal, Liam." "You are a criminal," I said calmly. "Technically, you falsified the nature of a transaction to deceive federal vetters. That's fraud." She spun around, her eyes blazing. "I did it for us, to keep our life intact, and now I need you to help me fix it." She walked over to the coffee table and picked up a typed document. She held it out to me. "What is this?" "It's a statement," she said. "We're going to release it jointly. It says that the payment to Julian Vane was a private settlement regarding an intellectual property dispute over the design of the Berkshire's house. It says you were fully aware of it, that we handled it together to avoid litigation." I took the paper. The lie was elegant. It explained the money, it explained the NDA, and it removed the sexual element entirely. It made the payment look like a boring legal headache rather than a passionate betrayal. "You want me to say I knew about this?" I asked, looking up at it. "You want me to tell the world that I approved a payment to the man who was sleeping with my wife?" "They won't know he slept with me," she insisted, stepping closer, her voice desperate. "That's the point. If we say it was about architecture, about intellectual property, the story dies. It becomes a boring legal footnote. The corruption angle disappears because there's a legitimate reason for the money. The affair angle never surfaces." "So you want me to lie," I said, "to the press, to the public, to our daughter." "I want you to be my husband," she shouted, slamming her hand on the table. "This is what marriage is, Liam. It's standing in the mud together. If I go down, do you think you walk away clean? You're the husband of the disgraced, corrupt politician. Your firm loses contracts. Our friends stop calling. This destroys you, too." "You're threatening me?" "I'm educating you," she said, her eyes cold and hard. "We are a corporation, Liam. You can't fire the CEO without crashing the stock price. Sign the statement. We go out there, we hold hands, we read this script, and we survive. Please." For a moment, she looked small. The power suit was gone, the cameras were outside, and she was just a woman terrified of losing her relevance. But as I looked at the script in my hand, I realized something. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She wasn't engaging with the hurt she had caused. She was just trying to balance the ledger again. She needed my integrity to cover her deficit. I looked at the window where the lights of the news vans were beginning to glow in the twilight. "You know," I said softly, "when I found that wire transfer, I thought the money was the worst part. I thought the fact that you paid him was the ultimate betrayal." I ripped the paper in half. The sound was loud in the quiet room. "But this is worse. You think my dignity is just another asset you can liquidate to pay your debts." "Liam, don't," she warned, her voice trembling. "I'm not doing it, Elena," I said, dropping the torn pieces onto the floor. "I'm not going to be your alibi. You wanted to buy silence. Well, you got it. I'm not saying a word, to anyone, including the press. If you don't support me, they'll assume the worst," she whispered. "Let them," I said. "Maybe the truth costs more than $50,000, Elena. Maybe it costs you everything." I turned and walked toward the stairs. "If you walk away now," she screamed after me, "don't expect to come back when the dust settles." I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I went upstairs, pulled my suitcase from the closet, and began to pack. The siege was outside, but the real war was over, and for the first time in 12 years, I wasn't a soldier in her army anymore. The sound of a zipper closing on a suitcase is distinct. It is a sharp, final sound, like a line being drawn through a sentence. In our master bedroom, under the vaulted ceilings I had designed to capture the morning light, that sound echoed like a gavel strike. I didn't take much. A week's worth of clothes, my laptop, the passport I kept in the safe. I left the cufflinks she bought me for our 10th anniversary. I left the watch she gave me when I made partner. Those weren't gifts. They were parts of the uniform, and I was resigning from the position. Elena stood in the doorway. She had shed the panic from the kitchen and replaced it with a cold, terrifying fury. She watched me place a stack of shirts into the leather valise, her arms crossed over her chest as if she were holding herself together physically. "You're actually doing this," she said. It wasn't a question. You're walking out on your family in the middle of a media siege. I'm walking out on a business partner who committed fraud, I corrected, not looking up. The family part ended the minute you wrote that check to Julian. Stop bringing him up, she snapped, stepping into the room. This isn't about him anymore. This is about loyalty. I am under attack, Liam. The wolves are at the gate. And you are sneaking out the back door like a coward. I stopped packing and looked at her. I'm not sneaking. I'm leaving through the front door. Past the cameras, past the reporters, and when they ask me where I'm going to tell them no comment. That's the most loyalty you're going to get from me. If you leave, she said, her voice dropping to a low, trembling register, you validate every rumor. They'll see the husband leaving and they'll know the marriage is a sham. You are handing them the smoking gun. The marriage is a sham, Elena. It is a partnership, she cried out, tears finally spilling over. But even her tears felt strategic, weaponized to induce guilt. We built a life. We have a child. Do you think Sarah wants to visit her father in some rented apartment because he couldn't handle a rough patch? A rough patch is an argument over finances. A rough patch is growing apart, I said, closing the suitcase and setting it on the floor. You had an affair. You paid $50,000 to cover it up. You lied to the federal government. And now you're asking me to lie to the world to save your career? That's not a rough patch. That's a demolition. I walked past her, but she grabbed my arm. Her grip was desperate, her nails digging into my jacket. I can fix this, she pleaded, the anger dissolving into frantic bargaining. I can make it go away. I'll withdraw from the nomination. I'll resign from the firm if I have to. We can go to the Berkshires. We can start over. Just don't leave me here alone with this mess. I looked down at her hand on my arm. For a second, I felt a flicker of the old instinct. The desire to protect her, to be the builder who reinforced the walls when the storm hit. But then I remembered Julian Vane in his studio, confused and used. I remembered the NDA memo. I remembered the lie she wanted me to sign downstairs. You don't want me to stay because you love me, I said quietly. You want me to stay because you can't manage the optics of a divorce right now. You're not afraid of losing me, Elena. You're afraid of losing the plot. She recoiled as if I had slapped her. Her hand dropped from my arm. The truth had hit the target. She didn't deny it. She couldn't. Her mind was already calculating the PR impact of a separation announcement. You're a bastard, she whispered. Maybe, I said, picking up my bag, but I'm a free one. I walked out of the bedroom and down the long, floating staircase. The house was silent, the staff having made themselves scarce. The foyer was vast and empty, a monument to the life we had curated for magazines and dinner parties. When I opened the front door, the noise hit me instantly. The shout of reporters, the click of shutters, the chaos of the outside world. They were waiting for a statement. They were waiting for the scandal. Elena didn't follow me to the door. She stayed upstairs, presumably to call her lawyer, to begin drafting the narrative of the amicable separation due to irreconcilable differences. She would spin this. She would survive this. She was a crisis manager after all. But as I stepped onto the porch and the flashbulbs erupted like lightning, I felt a strange lightness in my chest. I wasn't protecting her anymore. I wasn't hiding her secrets. The $50,000 had bought her silence, but it had bought my freedom. I walked through the gauntlet of microphones without saying a word. I didn't need to. The image of the husband walking away with a suitcase said everything that needed to be said. Inside the house, behind the heavy oak door, I knew Elena was standing at the window, watching. For the first time in her life, she couldn't buy the outcome. She couldn't negotiate the terms. She was alone with the one thing she had spent her entire life trying to avoid, the unvarnished, expensive truth. 3 years is enough time for a scandal to become a footnote and for a life to be completely rebuilt. I sat in the small, sun-drenched office of my new architectural firm in Burlington, Vermont. It was a far cry from the glass tower in Manhattan. There were no receptionists, no PR teams, and no galas. Just me, 2 junior draftsmen, and a drafting table covered in blueprints for a local library renovation. The wood beneath my hands was rough-hewn pine, not polished mahogany. It felt real. The radio in the corner was playing the midday news. I usually tuned it out, focusing on the lines and angles of the design, but a name caught my ear. It was a name that used to make my heart race, first with love, then with anxiety. Guest speaker Elena Vance, founder of the Vance Strategy Group, discusses the new era of corporate crisis management. I stopped drawing. I looked up at the small television mounted on the wall of the coffee shop across the street, visible through my window. There she was, Elena. She looked impeccable. Her hair was cut shorter, sharper. Her suit was a shade of steel gray that acted as armor. She was sitting across from a news anchor, her posture rigid, her smile practiced. She was talking about controlling the narrative and minimizing liability. She had survived. Of course she had. The investigation 3 years ago had been brutal, but inconclusive. The corruption charges never stuck because she had managed, at great expense, to prove the money was a private settlement, though she never publicly admitted to the affair. The D.C. appointment, however, was dead on arrival. The administration couldn't risk the baggage, so she retreated to the private sector, where moral ambiguity was an asset, not a disqualifier. She was richer now than she had been then. Her firm was the go-to for disgraced CEOs and celebrities caught in scandals. She had turned her own ruin into a business model. I watched her on the screen. She was laughing at something the anchor said, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes were vigilant, scanning the studio, scanning the world for threats. She looked exhausted in a way that sleep couldn't fix. She looked like a woman who was constantly auditing her own existence, terrified that someone might find another discrepancy in the ledger. I looked down at my own hand. It was stained with graphite. I wasn't rich. The divorce had been messy. She had fought for every asset, viewing the settlement as just another negotiation to be won. I walked away with enough to start over, but not enough to be powerful. And yet, I slept. I slept 8 hours a night. I didn't flinch when the phone rang. I didn't have to memorize a script before I walked out the door. My daughter Sarah came to stay with me every other weekend. We hiked in the Green Mountains. We talked about school, about art, about boys. She told me once, while roasting marshmallows over a fire pit in my small backyard, "Mom is always on the phone. She's always fixing something. You're just here." That was the difference. Elena had bought silence, but she had sold her presence. She was trapped in the maintenance of her own image. I turned off the radio. The silence in my office was comfortable. It wasn't the heavy, purchase silence of a secret kept. It was the natural quiet of a clear conscience. I thought about Julian Vane. I had heard he moved to the West Coast, used the money to disappear. He was just a line item in Elena's history, a cost of doing business. But for me, he was the catalyst. He was the crack in the facade that let the light in. I picked up my pencil and went back to the library blueprints. I was designing the children's reading corner. It needed to be open, bright, structurally sound. It needed to be safe. Elena had been right about one thing that night in the kitchen. Everything has a cost. But she had gotten the pricing wrong. She thought the $50,000 was the price of the affair. She thought the expensive lawyers were the price of the scandal. She didn't realize that the real cost wasn't financial. The real cost was the inability to ever truly be known. She had paid to hide who she was, and in doing so, she had become a stranger to everyone, including herself. I looked out the window one last time. The segment was over. Elena was gathering her papers, her face dropping back into that mask of fierce, lonely determination. "You kept the money," I whispered to the glass, "but I kept the life." I went back to work. The lines I drew were straight. The foundation was solid, and for the first time in a long time, the structure would hold.